you guys doing today? My name is Mick Akers. I'm the transportation reporter with the Las Vegas Review-Journal, also known as the Road Warrior. Today we have a panel talking about what can be done. You've heard, what's being done, so they're going to talk about, some of the things that they're looking in the future of what can be done to make traffic safety, improved process here. And so we have first Pushkin Katru from UNLV Transportation Research Center, Aaron Breen with the Traffic Safety Coalition, and Nancy Umundson with the Clark County Comprehensive Planning. Bring it up to you, Pushkin. Kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do.
So my name is Pushkin. My last name is unpronounceable, so you can just ignore it. Yeah. Okay. So I've been in transportation for many years. I did a few centuries ago my undergrad in transportation civil engineering, and then my PhD is from Berkeley in autonomous cars. We built one in 1983, but Google takes all the credit. Anyway, and then I did PhD in mathematics, where I studied traffic flow. So I studied kind of the microscopic, the vehicles, as well as traffic, and I'm studying physics. So I'm a geek. I just keep studying. Anyway, so I was the director of the Transportation Research Center here at UNLV when I worked with Aaron. And I'm just a faculty now, very happy. And I just like to analyze things, look at systems, and model them, and optimize them. I think we do optimization of everything we build, or every time we talk, we are optimizing. So that's my perspective on systems and things and how to improve. Always looking at how things relate to each other, and then how we can quantify what actions we take, what are the consequences with respect to time, and then how we can optimize the system to get the most out of it, keeping in mind what are we trying to optimize. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Aaron Breen. I am nothing like Pushkin. Although we work together and still do as part of the Transportation Research Center here on campus, where I've been for 23 years. I was brought in to build a coalition of people in the community to deal with traffic safety. We started out as a Safe Communities program, and because of the issues that we have in our community that surround pedestrian safety, about 5 years ago, our program was changed to the Vulnerable Road Users Project. So I am the director of that project. I enjoy working with a lot of you who are here in the room, as well as all of the entities. Being on the university campus, I've always said, makes me like Switzerland, easy to work with everyone. Excuse me, haven't coughed all morning till I get up here. So I look forward to this today, talking about what we can all do to make our roads safer in Clark County.
I'm Nancy Umundson. I'm the Director of Comprehensive Planning. I have been the director since 2010, and I moved to Las Vegas in 2006. I'm not from around here. I grew up on the East Coast, did most of my planning work on the East Coast, had lived in Southern California, but brought a different perspective coming here. My department deals with advanced planning, looking at the future of the county and what it should look like, as well as day-to-day operations, which would be current planning, every application you see, whether it be a Chick-fil-A or a new resort, it all comes across my desk. We work very closely with the various town boards and the community advisory councils, as well as the Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners. But I think today what we're going to talk about is a new vision that the county has and we as a department have. We have been working on a code that was developed in 2000, and our current Board of County Commissioners has directed us to relook at it, to rewrite it, to make it easier, and to look at how this community can start, I guess you could say, coming into the 21st century. So that's one of the things that I'm going to be talking about today, but the one thing that we are grappling with is a perception in Southern Nevada, as we've always done it this way, and we want to get past that we've always done it this way and look at new ways to do things.
Okay, I know you guys have worked together with all the agencies in town. Is there anything that outside jurisdictions are doing that you guys might want to model after here in Southern Nevada? I'll start with you, Pushkin.
Okay, as you're talking about modeling, as I say, I look at modeling from a purely quantitative perspective, looking at what variables come into play. So it's not necessarily that I have to copy somewhere else, but I have to look at what are the variables, what are the things involved. For example, so we have different agencies, but each agency looks at their jurisdiction and their domain of operation. So when they do it and they say, okay, I want to optimize this. But what can happen is when you look at the whole problem itself, if you optimize that and don't look at what is the consequence of this in other domains or the consequence of things that they're doing, what can happen is that you want to optimize something, you want to get something good, but it can be counterproductive. So for example, you can say, okay, there's one way to make traffic 100% safe. I can get rid of every fatality on the road by just putting a curfew on. You put a curfew, I've solved my problem, but then I've created a new problem that people can't move. So it's not just a question of, I want to reduce the fatalities. It's a question of looking at the problem from all perspectives, all departments, and how are they working together. So the key thing, I believe, is not to give, like this is your task, just do this, but to have some command and control which can look at the performance of the overall systems and how different agencies work together to solve the same problem, not break it down and give those problems to different subsystems. So I believe that is the crux of the matter here that can be addressed and the entire system can be improved.
Right, and we'll go with you, Aaron, as well.
I think if I were looking at examples from other places that we could and I would hope would implement in Clark County, it would be a program out of Sweden that is throughout all of Europe now called Vision Zero. And Vision Zero is now in 32 cities in the United States. I'm sorry to say that Washoe and Truckee Meadows is going to beat Clark County to the bunch of being the first Vision Zero city in the state of Nevada. So Vision Zero is a way of looking at how we build our roads by paying attention to who uses them and how they use them. So it is markedly different, I think, than the overall approach that we've had to traffic safety. I admire traffic safety engineers. I work with them every day. My background is actually special education, which I joke about making me uniquely qualified to work with the people I work with. And I say that with every bit of respect. I'm really just kidding. So engineers have been charged in their careers to move vehicles further, faster, better. But further, faster, better is not better for the overall community. We've given up our quality of life. Children don't walk or bike to school because their parents are afraid of what will happen to them. We're raising generations of people that don't know how to interact in traffic. It becomes a larger issue as they become the next generation of drivers. And so Vision Zero says, let's look at the human condition. Let's plan our streets understanding that no one's going to use them perfectly. And Vision Zero focuses on fixing pedestrian issues, because if you fix a road for a pedestrian and you make that a safer road, you've made that a safer road for every road user. So we talked a lot at the beginning of the day today about behavioral choices. Behavioral choices is not something we can try to educate, but certainly as an engineer or as a planner, as law enforcement, we can't change personal choices. We can try to influence them, but we can change the road that people are interacting on when they make a bad choice, because as human beings, we're always going to make them. So I would say that that's where we need to start looking, is at ways that where we know we have a problem, that we address those streets. Right now in Clark County, we know that roughly half of our pedestrian fatalities happen on segments of 6 streets, and that's where we should start.
Okay, and Nancy.
So your original question was, are we working with other jurisdictions? And in Southern Nevada, the municipalities as well as the county generally do work together on planning issues, transportation issues. The transportation issues are always funneled through RTC. From our perspective, I do agree with Aaron that you can't change the way people do things. You can't change the way people think, but you can provide them with opportunities to maybe think differently. And that, from a planning perspective, is what we're trying to do, or what we're looking to do in the future. Planning does not look at the roadways. That's a public works, that's an engineering type thing. But if we can plan our communities in such a way that it might get people out of cars. I mean, you can look at Summerlin overall. Summerlin has a lot of folks that just walk from point A to point B, but they generally don't walk to work because they're coming downtown or they're going to Henderson, and it's not easy to get there from here, shall we say. But if we can start planning our communities in such a way that makes mass transit or high-capacity transit more feasible or more desirable, then you will get more cars off the street, and you could lead to a safer roadway system. Again, that's not going to happen overnight, but it's a matter of changing perspective and changing the way we think about communities and changing the way we design and we look at communities. I can't design a road. That's for folks with more numbers thing and engineering type ideas, but maybe I can change the way a community thinks about itself. And ultimately, how a community thinks about itself might change the way that the roadways are used.
Okay, and are there any future trends that you anticipate making any big impacts as far as not only drivers but pedestrian safety as well? We'll start with you, Aaron. Yeah.
So I think that the biggest trends in pedestrian safety that we're seeing around the country, to truly make a street safer for a pedestrian, you need to lower the speed limit. And I've been saying this for years and years and years, that if you lower the speed that someone is struck at, it's a survivable injury. So if we were to, say, start with those streets where we know where pedestrians are the most in peril, right now that would be Flamingo Road, would be the #1 street in Clark County. We've spent a lot of time, attention, and RTC and NDOT dollars on Boulder Highway. And here's a fact. Boulder Highway was no longer the #1 street where you're the most likely to die in Clark County. And when we look at the reasons why, the one big thing that happened in on Boulder Highway in late 2017, there was a flasher put in front of the East Side Cannery, which was in fact the deadliest intersection in Clark County. And lo and behold, no pedestrians have died there since. That one location enabled Boulder Highway to no longer be the deadliest street in Clark County for pedestrians. Since that time now, 8 new flashers have gone in on Boulder Highway, including new places where pedestrians cross the street. So if you're looking at the senior center on Boulder Highway, at low-income housing on Boulder Highway, now there's actually a well-designed marked mid-block crosswalk with flashers that tell cars that are traveling roughly 55 or higher miles per hour that there's a pedestrian there. So when a pedestrian's hit at 55 miles an hour, it's non-survivable. So what we don't realize is that our streets here in Clark County, many of them, Flamingo Road, Charleston, Durango, you wouldn't think that Durango would be a high pedestrian fatality street, but it is. So when we look at them, they have certain things in common. They all have high speed, they all have less than optimal lighting conditions, and they have people that are crossing the street where they don't belong. And when a driver can't see the person who's making a bad choice crossing the street, that's a fatality. If you're needing to go to 7-Eleven and we're asking you to walk half a mile out of your way to do that, what we need to understand when we're planning our roads is that people are not going to walk a half a mile out of their way. So when you're asking them to do that under low lighting conditions, that's a pedestrian fatality waiting to happen. So those are some of the things where we need to start looking at how we can change our roads. And Downtown Joe just said in the last session that safety is expensive. Not doing something is expensive. In the long run, fixing it is actually cheaper than continuing to let it be an area where people lose their lives.
And Pushkin, what's your thoughts on the matter?
Yeah, I mean, I again look at numbers. So if you don't do anything, the amount of money, even if you forget about the human cost, if you just look at what happens when a person dies, how much money does it cost the economy? We're talking about multi-million dollars. But when you add up all these things, and then, for example, you have an accident that causes congestion, you look at the congestion cost. So even if you just look at the numbers, it's an extremely expensive proposition not to do anything. That means the money is just rolling, but the question is who's responsible for that? So if it's not my department, oh, it doesn't matter. But the point is society is paying for it, we are paying for it. So you have to look at the problem from that perspective and say, if we don't do something, if we don't take the action, we are losing a lot of money, and the economy of the system pays for it, and I'm not even talking about the human cost.
And Nancy.
So bringing up Flamingo, we're talking about the east side Flamingo, not the west side. So the east side Flamingo is older neighborhoods, older areas. Some of the development is not, either it's been abandoned or it's not built out. So from a zoning perspective, we need to look at ways to bring more vitality, more growth, more lighting, shall we say, into those areas. Because when you have areas that are older and they're not as, I don't want to say well-traveled because they're traveled by the cars, but they're not developed in such a way where you have the street lighting, you have people there all the time, you have people looking for places to go to. It does make it hard for pedestrians. It does make it darker for pedestrians. So from a planning and zoning standpoint, we need to look at ways to promote growth, redevelopment, and I know that's not necessarily the word I should be using, but look for ways to vitalize that portion of the roadway, or those roadways that are in disrepair and are the darker, the ones where the folks don't want to walk half a mile to get to 7-Eleven, but maybe if there was a new Smith's, they would be able to just walk right there. So that's what we need to look at.
All right. Yeah.
If I could jump on the end of that, because I'd like to highlight something that's incredibly positive, and taking exactly what Nancy just said and looking at being in the center of the city. If you were to look at these maps, and I urge you to do that before you go today, it's where pedestrians die in our city. By daytime, the nighttime is broken out. You can see that the red area in that heat map is right where we are. And then the one on the far right is where people have died in our city, where speed was the primary contributing factor. And I think that those maps are pretty eye-opening. Saying that, this core of the city that is the oldest, that had the old building codes, it is where we have a lot of problems. It's also because it's where we have affordable housing. So something that I would just really, I need to give a shout out to NDOT and to the RTC for all of their efforts that have been put in on Boulder Highway. If you have not seen the Reimagine Boulder Highway project, I urge you to go to the web and enter Reimagine Boulder Highway, excuse me, and look at the plans for Boulder Highway. Every entity was involved in that. An awful lot of community people were involved. The leader of the design project is sitting right in front of me. The potential on Boulder Highway is great. The potential for all of these neighborhoods is great. It just takes the will to do something, and it will change that road. It will revitalize that street. It will bring life back to Boulder Highway. I grew up here. Boulder Highway used to be a destination. It'll be a destination again if this project gets funding and goes forward. So it's a great example of the community coming together, led by NDOT and the RTC, who hired Atkins Global to do this design, with an awful lot of people who are in this room or your colleagues that had input into that project. There is great possibility in our community.
Okay, we've heard some of the Boulder Highway, improvements there. What else can we plan, design, and build infrastructure that would reduce fatalities and injuries overall? Oh, sorry, Pushkin.
Yeah, actually, I want to mention something else. So we're talking about very specific problems and very specific solutions. For example, the flashing light, telling the driver to slow down, and then you can see the results of that. But at the same time, so we can look at data, see, okay, this is the problem area, and then find a solution to just fix it. That's like a Band-Aid. You just put it there, we fixed it, now look at where the other problem is. But at the same time, for example, if you get more cars out of the road, so if you provide a viable public transport, now you have less number of cars. At the same time, nowadays, I mean, you can do web conferencing, video. You can work, for example, you can incentivize people not to travel that much to begin with. I mean, travel should be for maybe more recreation than to just for work, and we can minimize the work the way the technology is developing in the world. So we can look at the problem from multiple facets and then attack it rather than, I mean, we have to fix the immediate problems. For example, you identify this is the place pedestrians are dying. These are the engineering, psychological, and other solutions to that, planning solutions to that, and how you plan a city, for example. So the demands of travel, whether a human being will choose now a vehicle versus walk, of course, that is tied to psychology, tied to the activity the person does and the way things are planned. And then you see the problems, then you try to fix them. But at the same time, you got to look at what is causing it in the first place and address those as well. So again, from a system point of view, we have to address all of them. We have to have policies that incentivizes people to reduce travel, which is unnecessary, and that will, of course, have an effect overall. And you can see the numbers, you can quantify how much money we save by doing such things.
Okay, Aaron?
So I hate to sound like a broken record, but what could be done is getting everyone involved in the solution, really taking a look at why traffic crashes are happening where they are, which I think is happening. We know where they are. We can look and see what are the different contributing factors to each of those crashes. And then where we can, as a community, come up with a solution as simple as a well-designed crosswalk at a spot where pedestrians are crossing the street, incentivizing pedestrians to go and use the intersection. There are ways, I think, that we're not doing a good job at trying to get people out of their cars. Getting people to use public transportation more. It's hard to convince people to leave their cars at home one day a week and use public transportation if in fact what they're hearing on every time they turn on the news is that someone else died on our street. So I think that there's a lot of very positive things happening. We need to build on those, but certainly keep the human condition in mind when we're planning how we build our streets. So if there's a generator where people want to go, put a safe place for them to get there. We have an issue around every one of our schools. I hate to focus on schools because as a pedestrian person, they're the worst tragedies that happen, but they aren't our, especially looking at pedestrians, they're not our target market. Our target market is over the age of 45 now, because that's who's dying the most, far and away. When a child dies, we spend a lot of time on that because it's a particular tragedy. And there are solutions that involve the very people who are complaining the loudest. So if you're looking at an improvement around a school, it's the parents you need to talk to. Do we need to put in more places for parents to park? Do we need to encourage parents to park 2 blocks away and walk to pick up their children? What a concept. Teach their children safe walking as they walk back to their car. Get rid of the double and triple parking around the street. So there are solutions to I think all of our problems. If people who know me, this is going to be no shock to you that I'm going to say the number one thing we need to focus on is how fast cars travel on our streets. So it was brought up in the video that opened our program today. There are simply not enough police officers to get out there and do that all-important business of educating the public by writing them a ticket. So what everyone in this room could do is speak up about and say, yes, I'll pay more for more traffic enforcement. I think that our community, our fatality numbers are crying out for that. Because there just simply are not enough officers to do that job. I think that a forum like this and bring all the entities together to say, here's what I'll do about traffic safety and starting with the low-hanging fruit of the pedestrians and improving streets for them. I think that today's forum is critical to our quality of life here in Clark County, and I hope that we can build on what's happening today. I look over here at Carl Scarborough from the RTC, who is in charge of their transit program, and the multitude of things that are happening in transit, that we need to do a better job of getting people out of their cars and using transit. They're doing their job to make it safer. But the safe, it's like saying to pedestrians, there's no safe place to cross the street, even at a signalized intersection. You bring the safe. RTC can do absolutely everything imaginable to make a bus shelter safe. But if a driver makes a bad decision to drive impaired and comes off at that street at 50 miles an hour, people like to point the finger at the RTC instead of pointing the finger at the person who made that bad choice. So we need to really call out the problems where they are and not expect the entities to do everything for us. We have to be part of the solution as well. Starting with understanding as a road user, if you live 5 miles from where you work, if there were no traffic signals, if you were on a 45-mile-an-hour straightaway and you had a 5-mile trip to work and your street was 45 miles an hour, or if you traveled the exact same street and it was 30 miles an hour, the difference in your travel is 3 minutes and 20 seconds at 45 versus 30. So we need to do a better job of educating the public that it's not really the speed you're going, it's the stops in between. You'll get there much safer at 30 miles an hour than you ever will at 45 miles an hour. But the reality is that then you have to build the street that supports 30 miles an hour. And I think that's where we need to start, in places where we know that we have people who are dying, and that speed plays a big role in that. We need to look at how do we force that car to not go 45 miles an hour.
And Nancy.
So there are a couple of initiatives that the municipalities, the county, and RTC have been working on. One, of course, was a while back looking at complete streets, looking at ways to separate vehicles from the pedestrians, from the bicycles, from the bus traffic. And the municipalities have, and the county has looked at certain roadway segments to improve to complete streets just for that reason. The other thing that we've been doing is working on an onboard system, which is looking at the various segments of roadway to see what roadway segments might in the future be able to sustain high-capacity transit. And again, if we can determine what are good road segments for high-capacity transit from a planning standpoint, we can look at those same road segments to see if mixed use, higher density, would be appropriate. So we are looking and planning, and I know everyone thinks, well, you're studying everything to death, but there is a point where you do have to you can't shoot from the hip. We have to figure out in the long term what we want Southern Nevada to look like and what we want how we want our community to be. And one thing that we are looking at is to encourage, provide, and make possible more transit and communities that are easily connected by transit.
Okay, we have a few minutes left. I wanted to open it up to audience questions. If you have a question, just raise your hand and someone will take a mic over to you.
Behind me? Oh, sorry. Hi, I'm going to start with a comment and then I'm going to go to a question. My comment as an ordinary resident of Las Vegas who comes from San Francisco, is that public transportation is all great and it sounds very sexy in these policy wonk kind of seminars. But the reality is that we live in the west of the United States. And prior to the automobile, it was the horse. And the people who settled the West, it's ingrained in our core values here. We like our independence. We like our car. We're not getting out of our car. That's how a lot of people here feel about their handguns. You know, you can't keep me away from my guns in my truck and all that. So I don't think adding more public transportation is going to make a huge dent, because I don't think people are going to take it. What they might do in the age of Uber and Lyft is to say, okay, I'm going to leave my car at home one day a week and take Uber. Then you're not really gaining anything, because that Uber car is probably going to be driven by a human being. So here's another question for you. As a driver who lives in Summerlin, when I go up Sahara past Rainbow heading west, I see a lot of people jaywalking at night, and it's very dark. So pedestrians also have a responsibility, do they not, to not jaywalk and possibly wear a little more visible clothing at night? And then the next question I have is about streetlights. Is it true that the streetlights that many municipalities are installing are actually dimmer than they used to be? And if that's true, that's a real problem, because the population is aging and many people, as they get older, cannot see at night so well. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, one time, I drove my car through Manhattan. I drove for hours. I couldn't get parking. I never took my car again to Manhattan because I can't park. So I realized I love my car, but it's useless in that situation. So we as humans learn that when things get difficult, the price to use something becomes heavier and heavier. When more people get killed, we are humans, we are intelligent people. We look at, okay, I want my car when I'm driving to spaces. However, in the city, it's just too expensive to use. That's why then public transport becomes viable, becomes usable, becomes cheaper to everybody. Now here, I'm not saying it's necessarily cheap right now to have public transport from Henderson to Summerlin, of course. When you look at the numbers, okay, we can't justify it at this point, but as we get 100,000 more people coming to live in Vegas every year, or a big number, the equation changes, and you can look at the planning. So that's one point. And another point is when we say, okay, something is pedestrian fault or something is a driver's fault, we look at DUI, like, oh yeah, that's the fault of a person who is driving drunk. And even we were talking about, oh, it's the traffic light. But, it's almost close to 8 o'clock, a person is driving and they understand the difference between 30 and 45 miles per hour, but they're trying to catch that traffic light, which is the issue. So they're driving faster because they want to catch the traffic light. So that behavior then causes these problems. So the question is, we can blame those people, but we are those people. So the point is, again, as a system, these are behaviors that are inherent in the system. So when we take an action, we build solutions. Those solutions have to be cognizant of the issues that are materialistic, that are engineering, that are behavioral, and look at what are the consequences. And even if you look at the probability distribution of people's behavior, accidents are caused by people on the fringes. The question is, how much damage do they do? I study seatbelt usage every year for the past many, many years. So when you look at seatbelt usage, that is about more than 90% in the state of Nevada. But you look at fatalities, about 50% of people who die don't have seatbelts on. So when you look at solutions, blaming is easy, but designing the system, being cognizant of what variables are at play, is what we are here for.
Right.
So I'd like to answer your question too in a couple of different ways. First of all and foremost, it is absolutely incumbent on the pedestrian to cross the street safely, correctly, and reasonably. And that's where the issues are. So if someone's crossing a street up in your neighborhood, Sahara and Wallapai, Fort Apache, Rainbow, wherever that might be, those are all very fast streets. All 4 of those streets that I just mentioned, very fast streets. If there's no place close for that pedestrian to cross the street, I understand why they're crossing where they are. I'm not condoning it. I'm not saying that their action isn't illegal. I'm saying that I understand why they do it. and that we need to start looking at why people behave the way they do. We need to encourage pedestrians at every opportunity to wear something bright and reflective. You know, a white colored shirt at night does not help you here. Your comment on the light poles themselves and the lights that are coming in. So the lumens are actually higher. The new lighting has greater luminosity, I guess would be that word. So the lumens are actually higher. It's a stronger light. I think that what you may be referring to is it's a more focused light. But if you think that street lights are meant to light the way for pedestrians, that's not correct. Street lights are meant to light the road for cars. So what we have to do is what the city of Las Vegas has been doing on the last several of their projects, in the downtown area especially, is they're dropping in a second light that is lower to the ground, that is over the sidewalk, that is to light the way of the pedestrian. And there are places in the country that are using that technology along with LiDAR systems that will follow a pedestrian down the street so that, because believe it or not, there's people who actually win the argument when they say, I don't want that street light put in my backyard because it's annoying. I don't want airplanes flying over my house either, but I understand that it's part of living in our community. So I don't agree with that argument, but for the people who have won that argument, now there's a solution that you can have a light only come on when it needs to be used in the area. That would also get a driver's attention even more so if there was an area that was light versus dark. So we need to start looking at some of those solutions and helping everyone make good choices. If you had, again, City of Las Vegas, I don't know if you walk around City Hall. If you do this time of year, you would be encouraged to go to the traffic signal because there's shade at the traffic signal. If you're waiting to cross the street illegally, no shade. So there are things that we can help encourage people to do the right thing. And so obviously, because there are examples in our city, we're moving in the right direction. We need everybody's participation in looking at the role that each of us play.
We'll pass it to you, Nancy, to wrap us up.
So I was going to talk about the lumens, but that was already covered. But the bottom line is we have to take responsibility for ourselves as if we're pedestrians crossing the street, but we also have to educate folks. And we have to make neighborhoods understand that streetlights are not a bad thing. We see a lot of neighborhoods that do not want streetlights, and they will fight against the streetlights. They don't want the curb and gutter. They don't want, they want to have their community the way it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. The problem is it's not 30, 40, 50 years ago. So we have to look to the future and examine the way that our thinking is today and the way that we need to look in the future, and we have to try to make sure that the community is educated on the issues, whether it be pedestrians, whether it be drivers, whether it just be cyclists that don't understand they have to follow some of the rules of the road. We have to look to the future for today's community.
Okay, great. I'd like to thank the panelists here for their insight and their time. Do you have one more time for a question, or?
I'm sorry, we had one more question
Okay.
if we can.
No problem.
Mine is really not a question, it's more of a comment on everything that I heard here today is law enforcement and patrolling the streets, and we need more police on the streets and whatnot. But we have law enforcement individuals in this room, men and women, that we know that are out there every day doing their job, ticketing the people, so on and so forth. However, when that offender gets his ticket or her ticket for speeding, whatever the violation may be, he then takes it to Mr. Lawyer, who brings it to the municipalities, the traffic departments, and that ticket is then downgraded to a parking ticket, a $25 fine, and that law enforcement officer out there kind of ticketed him for nothing. That offender will never be subject to any demerits on his license or anything like that. I think the municipalities need to look into eliminating that and have that offender face the traffic court for the violation that he or she committed. So if we can do anything in our municipalities to work that out, I think that would be a great deterrent to a lot of the problems that we have on the streets today.
One more question here.
In Chicago, the CTA had to restructure how they were going to do their transit system because they were a large city. Las Vegas is becoming a large city, and when the Raiders come in, you're going to see an incline of traffic that's going to run through here that we may not be ready to address right now. But one of the things that I saw in Chicago when we were putting this system together was called terminals. And these terminals allowed buses to meet other buses at these terminals that would move the people. So I didn't have to drive into this city. All I had to do was get to this terminal, and when I got off here, another bus was going to pull into that terminal that was going to take me in the direction that I needed to be in. So you're talking about getting drivers out of their cars. You got to make it convenient for them to get from one place to another place, because I don't want to, in the 106 degree, stand out here and then 30 minutes later I got to wait on another bus, but the bus that I'm waiting on just passed, so I'm trying to catch it, you know. So these terminals, they pretty much work very well where people can come, they get on the bus, they go to that terminal will meet the other bus that will take them into their own destination. And they ran every 15 minutes during the rush time. After the rush time, as it declined, it went to 30 and to an hour. So, you know, the system worked for me and a lot of other people. We stopped driving in Chicago. We just went to the terminal and caught the bus.
So you know that we're getting there. We have many terminals throughout Clark County that's exactly how they run. So I'm sorry if there's not one in your neighborhood yet, but hopefully there will be one coming that will encourage you to use transit again. There's a lovely one in downtown. There's a lovely one at the South Strip. There's one out 95 in the northwest, where is it?
Elkhorn and Durango.
Elkhorn and Durango, so that's like Centennial Hills, right? And then there's another one at Rainbow and West Cliff. So it's coming. And that's a great point. So thanks for your comment.